from my neighbour's penthouse window. I watch my own house, my sanctuary, turn into a stage. They think I'm in Florida. They think I'm playing golf. But I'm right here, in the cold, watching the truth unfold. And the truth is worse than an affair or petty theft. They aren't just taking my money. They are trying to erase me. My name is Margaret. I am 58 years old. For 30 years. I was a senior executive at Northlight Innovations, a tech firm I helped build from the ground up. I retired last spring. I am a widow. I am sharp. And I am, or at least I was, completely self-sufficient. This house, the one in Bellevue, is mine. My late husband and I built it, beam by beam, and every memory I cherish lives within these walls. So, when my son, David, lost his job 6 months ago, it seemed natural for him and his wife, Sarah, to move in. Temporarily, they said, just until we get back on our feet. Besides, Sarah added, her arm around my shoulders, we want to take care of you, Mom. At first, it was wonderful. After decades of boardrooms and forecasting, the quiet of retirement had been jarring. Suddenly, my house was full of life again. Sarah, who I'd always found a little distant, was a flurry of activity. She took over the kitchen, preparing complex, healthy meals, quinoa salads, kale smoothies, things I'd never bother to make for myself. David, bless him, handled the chores I'd been putting off. He fixed the dripping faucet in the guest bath and organized the garage. I felt cherished. I felt needed. I felt like a mother again, not just a retired executive. When Sarah gently suggested I looked overwhelmed by the household financials, look at this stack. Mum, let me help ease the burden. I agreed without hesitation. I gave her the login information for the utilities, the property taxes, the everyday accounts. It felt like a perfectly reasonable delegation. The shift was so subtle I almost missed it. It started with the silence. I would walk into the kitchen, and the low, urgent whispering between David and Sarah would abruptly stop. They would spring apart, smiling too brightly. Then came Sarah's gentle observations. Mum, you left your keys in the refrigerator again, she'd say, holding them up, her brow furrowed with concern. I didn't remember doing that. A week later. Oh, Margaret, you paid this electricity bill twice. Are you feeling okay? I checked. I started to feel fuzzy, disoriented. I'd led teams of hundreds, managed budgets worth 9 figures, but suddenly I couldn't trust myself to remember where I put my reading glasses. David was worse. My son, the boy who used to tell me everything, could no longer meet my eyes. He was perpetually glued to his phone, his thumb scrolling furiously. If I asked him a direct question about his job hunt, he'd grunt, "It's fine, Mum," and walk out of the room. The warmth we shared, the deep bond forged by his father's passing, felt like it was freezing over. He was present, but he was gone. The real alarm bell rang last Tuesday. My old home office is upstairs. It's my sanctuary within the sanctuary. It's where I keep everything, my old Northlight files, my detailed personal financial records, my retirement portfolio, everything that defines my professional life. I went up to retrieve a tax document, and the key wouldn't turn. I jiggled it. Nothing. I called down to Sarah. "Oh," she called back up, her voice light. "The lock's been jamming. We called a locksmith, but he hasn't shown up yet." It wasn't jammed. I knew the feel of that lock. This was different. My key, the master key to my own house, was being rejected. It felt less like a mechanical failure and more like a declaration. The doubt, once it seeds, grows like a fungus in the dark. I stopped trusting myself. Now, I started watching them. I am a light sleeper, a habit from 30 years of early morning international calls. That's why I was awake at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday when I heard the noise. It came from upstairs, from my locked office. It was not footsteps. It was a rhythmic, mechanical whirring. A heavy-duty printer, perhaps, or something faster. It was the sound of processing. It lasted for nearly an hour, a steady, industrial hum in the dead silence of my home. The next morning, I took out the recycling. I've always been meticulous about it. Tucked beneath a pile of Sarah's kale packaging, I found 3 envelopes. They weren't junk mail. They were thick, expensive bond paper from places I'd never heard of: Apex Fiduciary Services, Keystone Trust Management, all addressed to David and Sarah, at my address. Why would they be getting mail from trust managers? They had no trusts. I had the only trust in this house. That evening, I decided to do a quiet audit, just a peek. I sat in my study and tried to log into my main retirement portfolio, the one I'd built over 30 years at Northlight. My password, the same one I'd used for a decade, was rejected. Access denied. I tried again, slowly. Access denied. A cold prickle ran up my spine. I called David in, trying to keep my voice casual. David? Honey? I seem to be locked out of my retirement account. Can you take a look? He barely glanced up from his phone. It's probably just a system glitch. Mum? They update the platform all the time. He came over, typed for perhaps 30 seconds, and handed my laptop back. There. It was just a cash issue. You're in. He was so dismissive. He fixed it, but I felt a cold dread. He hadn't asked me for my password. He must have had his own, or, worse, he had reset mine. The suspicion was suffocating me. I started noticing things I had previously dismissed. Sarah, who had arrived with 2 suitcases of sensible, slightly worn clothing, was now wearing new silk blouses. And then, one afternoon, she was chopping vegetables, and the light caught her wrist. It was a watch. Not just any watch. It was a Cartier, a classic, gleaming gold model that I knew cost well over $5,000. Where did an unemployed couple get that kind of money? I had to know about the office. I found Sarah in the kitchen. Sarah, I said. I really need to get into my office. I need my tax documents from last year. She laughed. It was a sound like tiny, cold bells. Oh, Margaret, I'm so glad you reminded me. I actually had the lock changed. The blood drained from my face. You what? I saw a mouse. Mum? A nasty little thing. We set traps, of course. But I had the room professionally sealed off just to be safe. We can't have you worrying about vermin. A mouse. She was lying to my face. She was locking me out of my own office, in my own house, and blaming it on a mouse. The lie was so blatant, so insulting. It was an act of aggression. That night, I couldn't sleep. The gaslighting was complete. I was the crazy one. The forgetful old woman who saw conspiracies in locked doors and new watches. I was staring at the ceiling when, at nearly midnight, I saw the sweep of headlights across my wall. I crept to the window that overlooks the street. A black, expensive sedan, a late-model Mercedes, was parked at the end of the cul-de-sac. It sat there, engine off, for a full minute. Then, A man in a dark, tailored suit emerged. He didn't look like a neighbor. He looked like a lawyer, or worse. I watched, frozen, as he walked up my driveway. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause at the door. He didn't knock. I heard the front door open. Sarah must have left it unlocked for him. I crept to my bedroom doorway and peered down the hall. Sarah was waiting at the foot of the stairs, silhouetted in the dim light. She didn't say a word. She just nodded, and the man in the suit, carrying a heavy briefcase, walked past her and went straight up the stairs, to my office, to the locked room. The next morning, the house felt thick with deceit. I came downstairs to find Sarah humming in the kitchen, making a fresh pressed green juice, as if nothing had happened. David was already on his laptop at the table, his shoulders hunched. I poured a cup of coffee, my hand steady. "We had a late visitor last night," I said, my voice neutral. Sarah's humming stopped. David's typing paused. "Oh," Sarah said, not turning around. "I must have slept right through it." "No, you didn't," I said. "You let him in. A man in a dark suit. He went upstairs to my office." Sarah turned, her smile strained. "Oh, that I'm so sorry. Margaret, I should have told you. That was the specialist. He works late." "The specialist?" "For the mice," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "He's the regional manager for the pest control company. He wanted to inspect the infestation personally. He's very thorough. A pest control expert. In a Mercedes. At midnight. The lie was so lazy, so insulting. It was worse than no lie at all. In that moment, the fog of self-doubt I'd been living in for weeks was burned away by a sudden, cold rage. My memory wasn't failing. I wasn't confused or forgetful. I was being gaslit, and I was being played for a fool in my own home. My executive mind, the one that had navigated hostile takeovers and complex contract negotiations, snapped back into focus. I was no longer a victim. I was an investigator. I had to know what was in that office. I needed to get them out of the house. Or rather, I needed to get myself out, so I could get back in. Later that afternoon, I made a show of booking a flight on my phone in the living room. "You know," I announced, "my old friend Clara from Northlight has been begging me to visit her in Portland for ages. I think I'll take her up on it. A week away sounds lovely." The reaction was immediate and profound. It wasn't just polite agreement. It was a visible, palpable wave of relief that washed over both of them. Sarah clapped her hands. "Mom, that is a wonderful idea. You deserve a break." David finally looked up from his phone, a genuine smile on his face for the first time in months. "That's great. Mom, the change of scenery will do you good." They were practically pushing me out the door. My trip was booked for 2 days' time, but I wasn't going to Portland. The next morning, I walked across the street to Arthur's house. Arthur is a retired law professor from the University of Washington, a widower, and the sharpest 80-year-old I know. His house is a modern marvel, and his study, a penthouse-level observatory, has a perfect, unobstructed view of my entire property. "Arthur," I said, accepting a cup of tea, "I need your help, and I'm going to sound paranoid." "Margaret," he said, adjusting his glasses, "paranoia is just a heightened state of observation. What's wrong?" I told him everything. The temporary move-in, the whispers, the gaslighting about my memory, the locked office, the late-night pest control expert in the Mercedes. He listened, his face growing more grim with every detail. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he stared out his window towards my house. "I was wondering," he said quietly. "They've been receiving an unusual number of courier deliveries. Not Amazon packages, private, bonded couriers, at all hours. More than anyone on this block. More than I've ever seen." "I'm pretending to go to Portland tomorrow," I said. "But I need a place to stay. A place where I can watch my own house." Arthur looked from me to his window, and a slow, strategic smile spread across his face. "The guest suite is yours, Margaret. It has an excellent vantage point." As I was explaining my plan, how David and Sarah would drive me to the airport, how I'd loop back in a taxi, Arthur held up a hand. He pointed out the window. "Do you mean a man like that?" I looked. It was 10 a.m. The same black Mercedes was parked in my driveway. The man in the suit was walking out of my front door, carrying his briefcase. He got into his car and drove away. The performance was convincing. I played the part of the excited, slightly dotty retiree perfectly. I packed my carry-on, fussed over my flight time, and let David and Sarah drive me to the airport. They were suffocatingly attentive. Sarah even fluffed my travel pillow. "Call us when you land, Mum," David said, waving me off at the departures curb. They waited until I was through security. An hour later, I was in a taxi, pulling up to the side street behind Arthur's house. I slipped in through his back gate. Arthur had been busy. His upstairs study was now a command post. He had a pair of high-powered binoculars on a tripod, a digital camera with a telephoto lens, and a legal pad. "Welcome to the surveillance state, Margaret," he said grimly. We settled in. The first day, the day of my departure, was agonizingly quiet. My house sat there, looking exactly as it always had. David mowed the lawn. Sarah did some weeding. It was a perfect portrait of suburban domesticity. I began to second-guess myself. Had I imagined it all? Was I truly becoming the paranoid old woman they wanted me to be? "Patience," Arthur said, not looking up from his newspaper. "A predator doesn't hunt while the scent is still fresh." He was right. That night, just after 8 p.m., everything changed. "We have activity," Arthur said quietly. A dark blue BMW sedan pulled into my driveway. A man and a woman, both in their 50s and impeccably dressed, got out. They looked nervous. They checked their phones, looked around the quiet street, and then walked to my front door. David and Sarah were waiting. They didn't open the door in greeting. It was already open, as if expecting them. The couple was ushered inside. 10 minutes later, another car, a silver Lexus. This couple was younger, perhaps in their late 30s. They clutched matching briefcases. They, too, were escorted inside. "What is this? An Airbnb?" I muttered, my hands shaking slightly as I held the binoculars. "No," Arthur said. "Look at their faces. They aren't travelers. They're clients, or victims, and they all look terrified." One by one, they arrived. A black Audi, a Tesla, a vintage Jaguar. In the span of 30 minutes, 5 wealthy, anxious-looking couples were welcomed into my home by my unemployed son and his wife. David wore a crisp new blazer. Sarah glided through the entryway like a seasoned hostess, taking coats, her new Cartier watch flashing under the light. Each couple was led upstairs, towards my office. For almost an hour, nothing. The house was lit up, but the curtains were drawn. We could only see shadows moving behind the upstairs window. Then, the front door opened. The first couple, the ones from the BMW, stormed out. The woman was crying. The man was red-faced, jabbing his finger back toward the house as he spoke. They got in their car and sped off. Next, the Lexus couple. They didn't look angry. They just looked dazed, utterly bewildered, like they'd been given news they couldn't process. One by one, the couples left, each in a state of agitation, confusion, or outright fury. Within 15 minutes, they were all gone. "What in God's name are they selling in there?" I whispered. Then, we saw the final act. The front door closed. The man in the suit, the pest controller, emerged from the hallway. He walked into my living room. David and Sarah followed. Arthur focused the telephoto lens. My son, David, went to the bar cart, my husband's old bar cart, and pulled out 3 crystal tumblers. He poured a very generous amount of what looked like my best scotch. Sarah raised her glass. David raised his. The man in the suit raised his. Through the window, under the warm light of my own living room, I watched the 3 of them. They clinked their glasses together. They were celebrating. My mind raced, trying to categorize what I had seen. It wasn't a party. It wasn't a brothel. It certainly wasn't a high-stakes poker game. The emotions were all wrong. The people leaving looked broken, angry, or terrified. "They look," Arthur said, his voice low as he adjusted the tripod, "like people who have just been given a catastrophic legal diagnosis, like they've been told they're being audited by the IRS, or that a lawsuit has gone terribly wrong." His words hung in the air. A legal diagnosis. The next day, I watched every move. I was a hawk. Just before noon, Sarah came out, dragging a heavy black garbage bag. She put it in her SUV, not in the bins at the side of the house for pickup. This was a separate trip. She drove off, and I knew she was headed for a public dumpster, trying to cover their tracks. "I have to get that bag," I said. "Margaret, you can't—" Arthur started. "I can." I put on a baseball cap and a pair of sunglasses from Arthur's mudroom. I ran out the back, cut across the lawns, and got to the curb just as she was pulling away. I grabbed my own identical black garbage bag, which I'd filled with Arthur's newspapers, and walked briskly down the street. When she turned the corner, I doubled back, dumped my decoy bag in my own bin, and ran back across the street with the real one. My heart was pounding like a drum. We spread a painter's tarp on Arthur's sunroom floor. It was disgusting. Coffee grounds, rotting food. But mixed within the filth was a treasure trove shredded paper. Not just a home shredder, either. This was crosscut, the kind of high-security shredding I used at Northlight. "This will take hours," Arthur said. "We have hours," I replied. We put on rubber gloves. We rinsed, we dried, we pieced. It was a grotesque jigsaw puzzle. For the rest of the day, we sat there, lining up slivers of text. The first piece we assembled was a fragment of a letterhead. "Superior Indemnity Life," it read. The next was a corner of a form. It had a box checked cause of death. "My God," Arthur whispered. We kept going. By evening, we had partially reassembled 6 different documents. They were not all the same. One was clearly a life insurance policy for a man in California for $2 million. Another was a complex legal document, full of clauses about offshore accounts a trust. A third was a blank, but official-looking, death certificate from the state of Nevada. The picture snapped into horrifying focus. They were running a sophisticated fraud operation. The man in the suit wasn't just a lawyer, he was the architect. They were targeting wealthy individuals who were in desperate situations, people facing audits, massive debt, or legal ruin. And David and Sarah were offering them a solution. Based on the documents, it was a multi-pronged scam. For some, they created elaborate, fake offshore trusts to hide assets. For others, clearly the ones who looked the most desperate, they were offering a more permanent solution, faking their deaths on paper to collect on their own life insurance. The angry couple who stormed out, they probably realized it was a criminal enterprise and backed out. The dazed ones, they had probably just signed up. My house, my respectable, stable, upper-class home in Bellevue was the perfect cover. It was a stage set of legitimacy. And my office, the whirring sound I'd heard, wasn't just a printer. It was an entire operation. The industrial-grade printers for forging documents, the machines to emboss fake notary seals, the secure servers to communicate with their clients. My son and my daughter-in-law had turned my home into a criminal syndicate, a one-stop shop for high-end financial fraud. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees went weak, and I had to sit down on Arthur's floor, right there on the tarp, surrounded by the debris of their crimes. My son, my David. He wasn't just unemployed. He was a monster, a high-collar criminal, using his mother's home, his father's house, as the headquarters for a racketeering operation. The disgust was a physical thing, rising in my throat like bile. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice shaking. I reached for my phone. Arthur put his hand on my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "No, Margaret. Not yet. Not yet." I looked at him, incredulous. "Arthur, they are committing federal crimes. They are destroying people's lives in my living room." "I understand," he said, his old law professor's voice cutting through my panic. "But you must think, if they are willing to do this to complete strangers for money, what have they already done to you?" The cold, simple logic of his question hit me like a physical blow. Suddenly, it all clicked together. The password to my retirement account being changed, David fixing it so quickly, so dismissively, Sarah's constant, gentle, poisoning comments. "Mum, you left the keys here. Mum, you paid that bill twice." Every little chip at my confidence. Every time they made me question my own mind. It wasn't just opportunistic. It was a strategy. They weren't just using my house for their business. They were using me. "We keep watching," Arthur said, his voice grim. "The night is not over." We stayed at the window. The black Mercedes eventually left. The lights in my house went off, one by one, until only the kitchen light remained. It was past midnight. We saw David and Sarah in there, alone. They were not cleaning up. They were celebrating. Sarah had retrieved a bottle of champagne from my wine fridge, my good champagne. She poured 2 flutes. They toasted. David looked less joyous than she did. He looked relieved, but also deeply stressed. Sarah, on the other hand, was glowing. She looked like a predator that had just finished a successful hunt. We were too far to hear, but the large kitchen window gave us a clear view. Arthur had the camera's telephoto lens trained on them. "I can read lips," I said. A skill I'd picked up from decades of watching people on the other side of silent boardroom glass. Sarah was talking, animated. She sipped her champagne and set the glass down. She was saying something. I focused. Just one. More. Signature. That's what it looked like. Just one more signature. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he's had since he was a boy. He looked anxious. I saw him mouth the words. She'll never agree. Sarah's face, the one that had looked at me with such false concern, turned to ice. She leaned in, her smile gone, her expression suddenly reptilian. I read her lips clearly. She won't have to. My blood ran cold. Arthur. What is she saying? Look. He breathed, adjusting the camera lens to zoom in. Sarah reached for her expensive new handbag, the one I had mistaken for a sign of simple vanity. She pulled out not a wallet, but a thick sheaf of documents, bound by a clip. She fanned them out on the kitchen counter, right next to the champagne. They looked official, legal. Can you get closer? I whispered. Arthur clicked the shutter, zooming in as far as the lens would allow. He took several photos, then toggled to the preview screen, enlarging the image. The light in the kitchen was bright. The text on the top pages was stark. My God. Margaret, Arthur said, his voice a horrified whisper. I looked at the small screen. The titles were unmistakable. The top document read, Petition for Competency Evaluation. The one beneath it, peeking out, was Durable Power of Attorney for Health and Finance. And there, pre-printed on the line for the subject of the petition, was my name, Margaret Vega. It was no longer just suspicion. It was certainty. The petition wasn't a vague threat. It was a legal weapon. All those little comments, the manufactured forgetfulness, the misplaced keys, they weren't just cruel, domestic manipulations. They were a systematic campaign to build a legal file. Step one in a corporate-style takeover of my life. They didn't just want the house. They wanted everything. The entire, substantial estate I had built over 30 years at Northlight Innovations. They wanted my stocks, my bonds, my retirement portfolio, my legacy. And the documents Sarah had fanned out on the counter were the key. I had to get them. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of Arthur's study, watching my house, my rage simmering into a cold, hard resolve. The next day, I waited. My patience was that of a predator. At 11:15 a.m., my patience was rewarded. David and Sarah emerged from the front door. They were dressed in their client-facing attire, David in his blazer, Sarah carrying her designer bag. They looked like a successful young couple heading to a business lunch, not criminals leaving their base of operations. They got into their car and drove away, off to poison another life, off to sell another lie. I gave them 10 minutes. I'm going in, I told Arthur. Be careful, Margaret. They could come back. They won't, I said. They just restocked. They're out to hunt. I crossed the street, feeling the eyes of the entire neighborhood on me, though I knew no one was watching. I walked up my own stone path, past the hydrangeas my husband and I had planted. I still had my original house key, the one they didn't know about, tucked in my wallet. It slid into the front door lock and turned with a familiar, heavy click. The house was cold and still. It smelled stale, of their champagne and lingering secrets. I went straight upstairs. I stood before my office door. The new lock was a bright, brassy insult. I tried my master key, just in case. As I expected. It was useless. But I had anticipated this. I was retired. But I was not weak. I had built this house. I knew its bones. I went to the garage, to my late husband's workbench. I retrieved a heavy claw hammer and a wide, tempered steel chisel. I returned to the door. There was no time for subtlety. I jammed the sharp edge of the chisel between the lock and the new, cheap door frame they must have installed. I struck the butt of the chisel with the hammer. Once. Twice. The sound was a gunshot in the silent house. A third strike, and wood splintered. I put my shoulder to the door and shoved. The lock tore free from the mangled frame, and the door burst open. The mouse infestation was a full-scale, operational command center. It wasn't just a printer. The room was humming with illicit enterprise. Against the far wall, where my antique writing desk used to be, sat a rack of secure servers, their green and amber lights blinking in the gloom. Next to it were two industrial-sized printers, the kind used for high-volume copying and printing official documents. There was a heat press, a laminator, and a machine I instantly recognized as an embosser for creating raised notary seals. My stomach turned, but it was the wall to my left that made my breath catch in my throat. They had mounted a 6-foot-wide whiteboard over my favorite wallpaper. On it, in neat, color-coded columns, was a detailed schematic of my entire financial life. My Northlight 401k, my supplemental stock portfolio, my real estate holdings, including this very house, my checking and savings accounts. It was all there. And branching off from each entry, in Sarah's precise, elegant handwriting, were arrows. They pointed to boxes that read, Phase 1, Consolidate. Phase 2, Liquidate. Transfer to Keystone Trust Offshore. It was a detailed, terrifyingly thorough business plan for my destruction. It was a flowchart for erasing me, all pending the successful acquisition of a single signature on a power of attorney. They had mapped out my ruin. I scanned the chaotic desk, past the stacks of fake letterhead and the rolls of official-looking paper. Tucked in a metal filing tray, I saw it. A single manila folder, identical to all the others, except for the label. My name. My fingers were numb as I opened it. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. The top page was the petition for competency evaluation I had seen on the camera, but beneath it was the supporting evidence. It was a 1-page preliminary medical report, supposedly from a Dr. Alistair Finch, a neurologist I had never met, never even heard of. The report detailed, in chilling medical prose, his findings. It mentioned my lapses in memory, my increased agitation, and difficulty with executive function. It concluded that I was showing clear signs of early-stage cognitive decline and required immediate intervention and management of my affairs. It was a complete fabrication, a signed, dated, legal-looking lie. But the next few pages were worse. They were printed emails, a chain between Sarah and this Dr. Finch, who I now knew was the man in the suit. He wasn't just their lawyer. He was their multi-purpose, high-end forger. Sarah's emails were filled with concerns about me. She seemed very confused today. She forgot she paid the same bill twice. Lies she had manufactured, now entered into a medical record. His replies were cold and clinical. This is all excellent data. We will use this for the petition. Once the durable power of attorney is signed, we can discuss a mild sedative regimen to keep her calm during the transition. A low dose of diazepam should be sufficient to manage her agitation. They were discussing drugging me, keeping me calm while they stole everything. I sorted the emails by date, and then I stopped breathing. The first email, the one where Sarah initiated contact with Dr. Finch, was dated 7 months ago. 7 months. David hadn't lost his job until 6 months ago. The job loss wasn't the catalyst. It wasn't a desperate act. It was the excuse, the pretext to get into my house. They had been planning this for a very long time. My eyes fell on a small, fireproof-looking lockbox on the floor, tucked under the desk. I didn't hesitate. I still had the hammer. It took 3 brutal, jarring blows before the lock mechanism shattered. I threw open the lid. Inside, my identity was laid bare. My real passport, not the expired one I kept in my desk drawer. My main checkbooks, the ones for the accounts with real money. And at the bottom, something that made me gasp. It was an old, faded blue passbook. First National Bank, it read. I had opened this account for David the day he was born. I put in $25 every month for 18 years, until he went to college. It was a sentimental object, a relic of my love for him. I opened it. The last entry from me was 20 years ago, but there were new entries. They had found this old, forgotten account, and, using my forged signature, they had linked it to my primary retirement fund. They had been siphoning, not large amounts, nothing that would trigger a fraud alert. $500 here, $1,000 there. Dozens of small, insidious transactions, bleeding me dry, moving my Northlight retirement money into this ancient account, from which they could easily withdraw it. This wasn't just theft, it was a desecration. They had taken a symbol of my love as a mother and turned it into their personal slush fund. I pulled out my phone. I stood back. My hands were perfectly steady now. The rage had burned away the shock. I methodically photographed everything. The whiteboard, in wide shots and close-ups. The fake death certificates. The emails. The forged competency report. The passbook. I took pictures of the desk, the servers, the printers. I documented every single piece of their criminal enterprise. I documented the ruin they had planned for me. And I documented the ruin I would now bring to them. I slipped out of my house, leaving the splintered doorframe of my office as the only sign of my entry. I walked back across the street to Arthur's, my face a mask of stone. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice low. "I got everything," I said. I sat at his desk, plugged my phone into his computer, and began uploading the encrypted files to a secure cloud server. The evidence. My declaration of war. My hand did not shake as I dialed. I did not call my local, suburban lawyer who handled my will. This was a different kind of problem. My first call was to Ben Carter, the man who had been my corporate counsel at Northlight for 20 years. "Ben," I said, "I have a situation. It's a complex, multi-state fraud-for-hire ring, and they're also attempting to steal my entire estate through a fraudulent petition for competency." "Margaret," he said, his voice instantly sharp. "Who is they?" "My son. And his wife. They are operating out of my home. I have extensive photographic evidence. I am sending you a link." My second call was to an old friend, a woman who had started in the cubicle next to me at Northlight and now ran their entire global cybersecurity division. "Jessica," I said, "I need a favor. I need a ghost in the machine. I'm sending you a file. I need you to find every digital footprint associated with these accounts and this man, Dr. Alistair Finch." The plan was formed within an hour, a 3-way conference call between me, my lawyer, and my cybersecurity expert. Arthur sat nearby, listening, a silent witness. This wasn't going to be a simple, messy domestic arrest. Ben made that clear. We don't just want them, Margaret. We want the network. We want Dr. Finch. We want Keystone Trust. We need to catch them in the act. The trap had to be set, and I had to be the bait. I returned from Portland the next morning, a day early. I took a taxi from the airport, just as I would have, and wheeled my carry-on bag up my own front walk. I let myself in. "David, Sarah." I called out, my voice intentionally wavering. They rushed into the hallway, their faces a mask of surprise. "Mom," David said, "what are you doing? We thought you were coming home tomorrow." I put my hand to my head, a gesture of confusion I had practiced. "Oh, dear. Did I just can't seem to keep track of things. I just followed the itinerary on my phone. Oh, I must have booked it wrong. I'm so tired." I let my suitcase fall from my hand. I looked, for all the world, like a woman at the end of her rope. I saw it. The quick, triumphant glance that passed between David and Sarah. The small, almost imperceptible smirk on Sarah's lips. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. My decline was accelerating. That evening, I let them dote on me. Sarah made me a calming herbal tea, which I accepted and poured down the sink when she wasn't looking. David fluffed my pillows. I sat on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, and looked at them. "You know," I said, my voice small and defeated, "I'm afraid you were right. Sarah." Sarah leaned in, her eyes wide with false concern. "What do you mean?" "Margaret." "This trip." I sighed. I was a mess. I lost my boarding pass twice. I couldn't remember my gate number. I think I'm having trouble. I looked up, first at Sarah, then at David. "I think you're right. I'm struggling with all these, the finances, the accounts. It's too much. Maybe I should just let you help me." They moved with sickening speed. My confession of weakness was the starting pistol they had been waiting for. "Oh, Mom," Sarah said, her voice a balm of poison, sliding onto the sofa next to me. "You're so right to ask for help. We were so worried you'd be too proud." She stroked my arm. "We actually know the perfect financial specialist. He's been helping a lot of families in the area, just to get things organized. He's the best. Mom." David chimed in, already pulling out his phone. "Really, top of his field. I'm sure he could come by, just to talk." They didn't even wait for the next day. A few urgent text messages later. And the specialist was available. He could be there in an hour. They were closing the net. When the doorbell rang, I let David answer it. The man in the suit. Dr. Finch walked in, carrying his heavy leather briefcase. He greeted me with a thin, professional smile, as if we had never met, as if he hadn't been in my house at midnight, as if he hadn't written a medical report diagnosing my fake dementia. They sat me in my living room, my sanctuary. Sarah and David sat opposite me, like a panel. The expert sat in my late husband's favourite armchair. He clicked open his briefcase and pulled out a neat stack of documents. The power of attorney, the petition. "Mrs. Vega," he said, his voice smooth and empty. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your children have expressed such deep concern. This is just a formality, really. A way to take the burden off your shoulders. We just want to make sure your assets are protected." He fanned the papers out on the coffee table. He slid the final signature page and a heavy, expensive-looking pen toward me. "Just sign here. And here," he said, tapping the lines. "And we will take care of all the worrying for you." David picked up the pen. My son. He held it out to me. "Mom, it's okay. We'll take care of everything now." Sarah stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder, smiling. It was a smile of pure, triumphant greed. I looked at the pen. I looked at the line waiting for my name. Then I looked up at David's face. "Do you remember when you were in the 3rd grade?" I asked, my voice clear and steady. David's smile faltered. He looked confused. What are you talking about?" "Mum? You fell off the monkey bars at school and broke your arm," I continued. "Your left arm. You cried so hard, but when you got the cast, you were so proud. You made everyone sign it, but you saved the best spot, right on the wrist. For me. You said I had to be the first to sign." "Mum, I don't know what that has to do with this," he stammered, looking to Sarah for help. "I am talking," I said, and the voice that came out was not the confused retiree. It was the CEO. It was the woman who had built Northlight Innovations from nothing. "I am talking about my signature. I am talking about the $1.4 million in my retirement fund. I am talking about this house, which you have desecrated. And I am telling you, you will never have it." Sarah's face turned to stone. "You old..." She lunged, trying to snatch the documents from the table. She was too late. On that cue, the front door and the back patio door burst open at the same time. My living room was suddenly, shockingly full of people. My lawyer, Ben Carter, walked in first, followed by Arthur, who looked grimly satisfied. "That's him," Ben said, pointing at the expert. "And those are the documents." 2 men in suits, investigators from the state's Economic Fraud Division, stepped forward. "David Vega, Sarah Vega, you are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempted aggravated theft against an elder." As they were processing, a final figure stepped in, a woman in a crisp, dark suit. "Special Agent Rice, FBI," she said, flashing her badge at the expert. "Your name isn't Dr. Finch. It's Julian Cole. And your little interstate trust management scam is over." David just collapsed. He sat on the floor, his head in his hands, weeping. Sarah, however, was silent. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with a pure, cold hatred as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. They were caught red-handed, with the forged petition, the fraudulent power of attorney, and a house full of evidence. I didn't watch them being led away. I turned, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a cup of coffee. I stood at my window, breathing in the quiet of my own, reclaimed home, as the last of the flashing lights disappeared down the street. Thanks so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary and give this video a like. And please, hit that hype button. It really helps to support the channel and ensures these stories get heard by more people.